The nurse signed the wrong registry line. Now, she's married to the hospital's millionaire owner. Before we begin, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's continue the story. The rain had just started over the small town of Willow Creek, tapping gently against the tall glass windows of St. Augustine Hospital. Inside, the marble floors gleamed, nurses hurried through long hallways, and the faint echo of footsteps blended with the steady hum of typewriters from the administration office. It was 1952, a time when everything smelled of coffee, disinfectant, and freshly printed paper. Clara Evans, a young nurse with tired eyes and a pressed white uniform, walked quickly down the corridor, clutching a stack of patient charts against her chest. She was late again. The registry clerk waved her in, saying briskly, "Sign here, Nurse Evans, before Dr. Wallace arrives." Flustered, Clara stepped forward, the pen trembling slightly in her hand. The room was crowded, two other nurses whispering near the window, a surgeon arguing with a secretary about missing files, and the rhythmic clack of the wall clock counting every second of her embarrassment. She looked down at the open ledger, rows of names and lines waiting for signatures. Without realizing it, her pen slid into the wrong line, the one meant for times, marriage registry times between hospital affiliates, not medical consent. The ink spread, dark and permanent. Asterisk, Clara Evans, asterisk. Across the desk, Dr. Henry Wallace, the hospital's owner and head surgeon, had just finished signing a line above hers. He barely noticed the petite nurse rushing out the door, but fate had already connected their names in ink. Minutes later, the mistake began to ripple. The clerk frowned, comparing signatures, then froze. "She signed the wrong line," he murmured. The quiet of the room turned into whispers that carried down the hallway. In the east wing, Clara leaned against the tiled wall, catching her breath. Her reflection in the polished metal cabinet showed a woman who looked braver than she felt. "Just another long day," she whispered to herself, unaware that her life had already changed. When Dr. Wallace finally crossed paths with her later that morning, it was in the main corridor near the surgery wing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed immaculately in a gray vest and white coat, his presence enough to hush any conversation. Clara nearly dropped her clipboard when he stopped in front of her. "Miss Evans, I believe we have a problem," he said evenly, his voice low but commanding. "A problem, sir?" she stammered, clutching the clipboard tighter. He showed her the open ledger, her name neatly inked beneath his. "According to this, Nurse Evans, you and I are legally married." Her face drained of color. "That cannot be right. I just signed where they told me to." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Apparently, you signed under my name, and now the state of Massachusetts recognizes us as husband and wife." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and the faintest trace of something unspoken. Around them, the hospital continued its rhythm, nurses pushing carts, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. But inside Clara's chest, everything had stopped. Henry looked at her closely. "It can be undone," he said finally, "but it will take time." Clara nodded quickly, desperate to disappear. "I will fix it, Dr. Wallace. I swear." But as she turned and hurried away, he watched her with an expression she did not see, part irritation, part curiosity. Outside, the rain poured harder, streaking the windows like veins of silver. Inside, two signatures glistened under the lamp, a nurse's trembling hand and a millionaire's deliberate stroke tied together by one fateful mistake. And that is how it all began. Now, let us return to our main character. By the next morning, rumors had spread through every hallway of St. Augustine Hospital. The nurses whispered over coffee, and the janitor hummed under his breath, pretending not to listen. "Did you hear? Nurse Evans accidentally married Dr. Wallace." The story sounded too absurd to be true, yet gossip had a way of turning truth into theater. Clara tried to ignore it, her chin raised, her heart trembling. But the moment she walked into the nurses' lounge, every conversation stopped. Cups clinked, someone coughed to fill the silence. The head nurse forced a smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Wallace," she teased, but her tone carried more curiosity than warmth. Clara forced a polite laugh, grabbed her chart, and left before her eyes gave her away. Outside, The cold morning air smelled of rain and coffee from the vending machine. Clara wrapped her cardigan tighter and walked toward the east wing, her shoes tapping softly on the tiled floor. She repeated to herself, it was a mistake, just a mistake. But each time she said it, her cheeks burned hotter. The ink in that ledger had already written its own story, one she had not agreed to star in. In the administrative office, Dr. Henry Wallace sat behind his mahogany desk, flipping through patient files but not reading a single word. He was a man of control, the kind who built a hospital with his own 2 hands and a relentless will. Yet here he was, undone by a nurse's misplaced signature. The phone rang. The legal department was on the line. Yes, it appears to be binding, the lawyer said flatly. The registry is official under state law. It can be annulled, but not quietly. Henry exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Then let us keep it discreet. The last thing I need is scandal in my hospital. Later that day, he found Clara at the nurse's station, adjusting bandages for an elderly patient. Her hands moved with practiced gentleness, the kind that spoke of empathy more than training. He waited until the room emptied. "Nurse Evans," he said. She froze at the sound of his voice. "Dr. Wallace," she answered, her tone clipped but respectful. "I spoke with legal," he continued. "We can dissolve the marriage, but it will take several weeks." She looked up, startled. "Weeks?" He nodded. "In the meantime, we maintain professionalism. No one needs to know beyond what they already do." Clara tried to respond, but words failed her. The thought of being tied, even on paper, to the most powerful man in the hospital filled her with both dread and something she refused to name. She simply said, "Understood, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and tension. That evening, the rain returned, painting streaks across the hospital windows like silver threads. Clara sat in her small dorm room, the single lamp casting a circle of light on the peeling wallpaper. Her roommate had gone home for the weekend, leaving her alone with the hum of the radiator. She opened a letter from her landlord 2 weeks overdue on rent. She folded it neatly, placed it under her pillow, and whispered, "I will find a way." From her desk drawer, she pulled out a small sketchbook filled with pencil drawings, patients, hallways, faces that came and went. On one page was a recent sketch. Dr. Wallace standing in the operating theater, light reflecting off his glasses. She stared at it, then shut the book quickly, ashamed of the warmth in her chest. Meanwhile, across town, Henry sat alone in his study. A fire crackled softly in the marble fireplace, throwing gold light against shelves of medical books. He held a glass of scotch but did not drink. His late wife's photograph sat on the mantel, a reminder of a promise he had once made to never remarry. "A mistake," he muttered, staring into the flames. "Just a bureaucratic mistake." Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face, nervous but steady, framed by the white halo of her nurse's cap. At midnight, the rain slowed, leaving the world hushed and gleaming. In 2 separate rooms, 2 people lay awake, one frightened of scandal, the other frightened of her own heart. The papers would take weeks, but fate had already begun its quiet work. One misplaced signature had bound them in ink, but what would bind them next would not be written on paper. It would be written in moments, in kindness, and in the silent pulse of something neither of them yet understood. Now, let us return to our main character. Days turned into a quiet rhythm of routine at St. Augustine Hospital, but beneath its polished floors and white corridors, whispers never ceased. Every time Clara passed through the hallway, she could feel the glances following her, soft laughter cut short, and conversations that stopped the moment she entered the room. Still, she kept her chin high, her uniform pressed, and her voice steady when she spoke to patients. It was easier to pretend nothing had changed, even as her heart reminded her it had. One morning she was called to the top floor, to the private suite where Dr. Wallace held his administrative meetings. The brass plate on the door gleamed under the fluorescent light. She knocked once before entering. Inside, Henry stood near the tall windows, his silhouette outlined by the gray winter sky. His office smelled faintly of cigar smoke and polished leather. On his desk lay a single golden ring, the same one she had noticed weeks ago, engraved with his initials. "You wanted to see me, Dr. Wallace?" she asked softly. He gestured to the papers spread before him. "I am reorganizing staff schedules for the new surgical wing. I need someone to assist in patient coordination." His voice was clipped, professional. "You are detail-oriented, Nurse Evans. I want you on it." She blinked, caught off guard. "Are you certain, sir?" "The other nurses might. I do not make decisions based on gossip, he interrupted firmly. Report here. Every morning at 8. When she left his office, her heart beat unevenly. For the first time since the incident, he had looked at her not with frustration, but with something close to respect. That evening, she stayed late to sort patient charts. When Henry walked past the open doorway, he paused. Clara was bent over a table, carefully rewriting the faded labels on each file. The soft yellow light from the desk lamp made her hair shimmer like honey. He almost said something, then stopped himself and walked away, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. Over the next few days, their interactions became frequent. Mornings began with polite greetings that slowly turned into brief conversations about patients, about schedules, about the weather. She discovered he had a quiet sense of humor hidden behind his stern composure, and he discovered she had a strength that went beyond duty. One evening, as the winter sun dipped low and the last of the nurses clocked out, Clara lingered by the east wing. The hallway was empty except for the distant hum of the heating system. She carried a bundle of medical reports toward the records room when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Henry. He carried his overcoat folded over one arm, his tie loosened. "Still working?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Someone has to make sure your empire runs smoothly, Doctor." He chuckled, a rare sound that filled the space between them. "Careful, Nurse Evans. You might start sounding like my partner." The words hung in the air longer than either expected. Clara turned away quickly, her face warm. Henry cleared his throat. "You should head home. It is late." "Yes, sir," she replied, but her feet did not move. For a moment, the air between them thickened with something that was not entirely professional. Then a nurse entered the corridor, and the spell broke. Henry nodded curtly and walked away. Later that night, in her small dorm room, Clara sketched again, this time the outline of a man standing near a window, the city lights glimmering behind him. She shaded the edges carefully, her pencil tracing what her heart refused to name. Meanwhile, in his mansion outside the city, Henry stood by the fireplace, the golden ring glinting on the desk beside him. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and for reasons he could not explain, placed it into his coat pocket. When he looked into the fire, he did not see the past anymore. He saw the quiet eyes of a nurse who had changed the rhythm of his days without meaning to. That night, both of them dreamed of the hospital, not the building itself, but the warmth in its corridors, the flicker of connection in between duty and destiny. The mistake that had once embarrassed them now seemed to weave something fragile and real. Neither of them knew it yet, but the lines between what was signed by accident and what was written by fate were beginning to blur. Now, let us return to our main character. Winter settled heavily over Willow Creek, blanketing the city in gray skies and the faint scent of snow. Inside Street Augustine Hospital, the days grew longer and the nights colder. The nurses moved like ghosts through the dim corridors, their shoes clicking softly on the tiles, while Clara found herself pulled deeper into a life she never meant to live. What had started as a clerical error now felt like an invisible thread tying her to Dr. Wallace's world. Henry's presence had shifted. The man who once kept his distance now seemed to notice everything she did, how she organized the supply room, how she lingered by the children's ward, how she smiled even when exhaustion carved shadows under her eyes. One afternoon, he appeared beside her in the records room, sleeves rolled up, holding a stack of files. "You missed your lunch break again," he said quietly. She looked up from her paperwork, startled. "I am fine, Dr. Wallace." "You are not fine," he replied, his tone softer than his words. "You are pale, and your hands are shaking. Sit down for a minute." Before she could protest, he placed a paper cup of coffee in her hand. "Drink. That is an order." The warmth of the cup spread through her fingers. For a moment she saw not the intimidating owner of the hospital but a man who had known loneliness too well. "Thank you," she murmured. "You do not have to take care of me." He looked at her steadily. "Someone should." That night, as the snow began to fall, the hospital's power flickered and went out. Emergency lights cast long red glows across the halls. Clara and Henry worked side by side to guide patients, checking the oxygen tanks and heart monitors. When they reached the children's ward, Clara knelt beside a frightened boy, whispering softly, "It is just the lights, sweetheart. Everything will be all right." Henry stood behind her, watching how the child's breathing steadied at the sound of her voice. Something in him shifted again, like a locked door quietly opening. When the power returned hours later, the entire staff gathered in the cafeteria for late-night cocoa. The atmosphere was lighter, almost festive. Henry stood at the back of the room, unnoticed, watching Clara laugh with the other nurses. For the first time in years, he smiled without realizing it. A few days later, Clara was summoned to his office. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching dust motes in its glow. On his desk lay a sealed envelope. "A position has opened in the new surgical wing," Henry said. "I want you to lead patient coordination there." She blinked in disbelief. "Me? Sir, I am only a nurse. There are others more qualified." He shook his head. "No one understands this place the way you do." Her gratitude was real, but so was her unease. "People will talk," she whispered. "They already do." Henry's expression darkened. "Let them. I built this hospital for truth, not rumors." As the weeks passed, their paths crossed constantly during morning rounds, in late meetings, in the quiet corners of the hospital where the world seemed to disappear. The more they tried to stay professional, the harder it became to ignore the current between them. One evening, as a snowstorm raged outside, Henry found Clara in the east hallway, gazing out the window at the swirling white. "You should go home before the roads close," he said. She smiled faintly. "Home is too quiet." He hesitated, then offered his coat. "At least take this." She slipped it over her shoulders, the fabric heavy and warm. Their hands brushed, and for a second, time stopped. The storm outside howled, but inside, the silence was louder. She whispered, "You should not be so kind to me." He met her gaze. "Maybe kindness is long overdue." That night, long after she left, Henry stood by the same window, his reflection blending with the snowfall. The coat she wore had once belonged to his late wife, yet he had given it away without hesitation. He realized then that grief was no longer the only thing filling his heart. Something new had taken root, something fragile, dangerous, and alive. And somewhere in her small dorm room across town, Clara traced her fingers over the wool collar of that same coat, feeling the warmth of his gesture linger. Neither spoke of what was happening, but both knew. The mistake that had bound them on paper was beginning to bind them in truth. Now, let us return to our main character. The winter thaw came slowly to Willow Creek, turning the streets from white to silver, and the hospital hummed again with its ordinary rhythm. But for Clara Evans, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every morning she walked through the doors of Street Augustine with her heartbeat echoing in her ears, aware that somewhere in those endless hallways, Henry Wallace was waiting, sometimes visible, sometimes not, but always there. The air between them had changed. It was no longer the stiff politeness of a doctor and a nurse. It was the quiet tension of two people trying not to feel what was already happening. One afternoon, the Board of Trustees held a meeting in the grand conference room. The chandeliers glowed softly over polished oak, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Henry stood at the head of the long table, discussing the new children's wing. Clara sat to his right, taking notes, her presence almost unnoticed until one of the senior doctors, a sharp-tongued man named Dr. Howard, leaned back and said with a smirk, "It is convenient, is it not, to have your wife running the coordination department?" The room went still. Clara's pen froze mid-stroke. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm. "Mrs. Evans is here because she is capable. Her title on a piece of paper has nothing to do with her work." Dr. Howard chuckled dryly. "Still, the staff is talking, sir. Appearances matter." Henry straightened, his tone suddenly edged with authority. "Then perhaps it is time we remind everyone that gossip has no place in medicine." After the meeting, Clara followed him into the hallway. "You should not have defended me like that," she said softly. "It only makes them talk more." Henry stopped, his expression unreadable. "I do not care what they say." "But I do," she whispered. "This job is all I have." For a moment, he looked as though he might say something, but instead he nodded once and walked away, leaving her with the echo of his footsteps. That evening, Clara went to the children's ward to escape the heaviness of the day. The small beds were lined neatly under murals of painted clouds and toy airplanes. A little girl with red braids tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Will you read to us, Nurse Clara?" she asked. Clara smiled and sat down, opening a worn storybook. Her voice softened as she read, the children gathering close, their laughter filling the room. She did not notice Henry standing by the door until the story ended. He watched her quietly, the corners of his mouth lifting. When their eyes met, the tension of the day seemed to dissolve. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "You make people forget pain." She looked at him, uncertain. "Including you?" she asked before she could stop herself. His gaze deepened. "Especially me." The next morning, Clara found a small wrapped package on her desk. Inside was a new sketchbook, bound in dark leather, with her initials embossed on the cover. There was no note, but she knew exactly who it was from. That night, she began to draw again, this time not patience or hallways, but the human moments in between, a hand offering comfort, a laugh caught midair. And on one page, the outline of a man by a fireplace, his shoulders heavy with grief and hope intertwined. Days turned to weeks, and winter melted fully into spring. Henry grew more open, his laughter easier, his words warmer. Clara tried to convince herself it was only gratitude, that what she felt was admiration, not affection. But each time he smiled at her, each time his hand brushed hers as they reached for the same file, the truth became harder to deny. One evening, as they stood together outside the hospital's main doors, watching the sunset bleed gold across the sky, Henry spoke first. "You changed this place, Clara. You changed me." She turned toward him, her heart in her throat. "You do not mean that." He smiled faintly. "I do." Then, quieter, "I just do not know what to do about it." Before she could answer, a nurse rushed out from the lobby, breathless. "Dr. Wallace, the Foundation Gala, your attendance is required tonight." The moment broke, and Henry stepped back, his face returning to its composed mask. "Of course," he said, turning to leave. But before he walked away, he looked back at her once more. "You should come too, Clara. After all, this hospital is as much yours as it is mine." She stood there long after he disappeared inside, the fading light reflecting on the hospital's glass doors. Somewhere deep inside her, she knew that the night of that gala would change everything. Now, let us return to our main character. The night of the hospital's annual Foundation Gala arrived with the kind of splendor that made even the oldest walls of Street Augustine shimmer. The ballroom had been transformed into a sea of gold and ivory. Chandeliers dripped with crystal light, and an orchestra played softly in the corner. Guests in tuxedos and silk gowns filled the space with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. But amid the glamour, Clara Evans stood near the entrance, her hands folded nervously in front of her. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but modest, borrowed from a friend. Her reflection in the mirror near the coat check barely looked like her, the nurse who spent her days in white shoes and starch-pressed uniforms. Tonight she looked like someone who belonged in another world. When Henry Wallace entered the ballroom, every head turned. He carried himself with the confidence of a man born to command attention, tall, polished, composed. His eyes swept the room until they found her, standing alone under the soft glow of the chandelier. For a moment, his expression changed, gentle, surprised, almost proud. He made his way toward her through the crowd. "You came," he said, his voice quieter than the music. "You invited me," she replied, her lips curving slightly. "I did not think you would." "Neither did I," she admitted, and they both smiled before silence settled comfortably between them. As the evening unfolded, Clara found herself at his side more often than not. He introduced her to donors and physicians, his tone always formal, but his gaze always lingering. When a photographer asked for a picture, he placed a careful hand on her back, the gesture respectful yet undeniably intimate. For the first time, she felt what it was like to be seen not as a nurse, not as a roomer, but as someone who mattered. Then came the moment that changed everything. Near the end of the night, the master of ceremonies took the stage to make a special announcement. The room hushed, and the microphone hummed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this year, the hospital recognizes not only innovation and leadership, but also partnership, the unity that drives Street Augustine forward. Please welcome our esteemed benefactor, Dr. Henry Wallace, and his wife, Mrs. Clara Wallace." The applause erupted like thunder. Clara froze. Her heart stopped, her breath caught in her throat. "What?" she whispered. The spotlight swept across the room and landed on her face. Henry's jaw tightened. He took one step forward, then another, but before he could speak, the crowd surged closer, congratulating, clapping, cheering. "A fine couple," someone shouted. "Such a story," another said. The music swelled again, drowning her confusion. Clara turned to Henry, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You knew," she said under her breath, her voice trembling. "You knew they still thought we were married." His expression faltered. "I did not plan this, Clara." "But you did nothing to stop it," she interrupted, her voice sharp with hurt. Before he could respond, she turned and fled the ballroom, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble floor. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a wave. She ran past the line of cars waiting for guests. down the stone steps, her breath clouding in the icy air. Somewhere behind her, she heard Henry calling her name, but she did not stop. She only stopped when she reached the hospital courtyard, empty now under the winter moon. The fountain in the center had frozen over, its surface reflecting her pale face. Henry caught up moments later, his coat thrown over his shoulders. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "Please listen." "To what?" she whispered. "To another explanation? You let them announce me as your wife in front of the entire city." "It was a mistake," he said, almost pleading. "The same mistake that started all of this." She shook her head, tears glinting under the moonlight. "No, Henry, that was paperwork. This was a choice." They stood there in the cold, the distance between them filled with everything unsaid. Finally, she stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot be part of your world, not like this. You will fix the records tomorrow. I will transfer to another hospital." He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. "Clara, do not do this." She met his gaze one last time. "Good night, Dr. Wallace." When she walked away, her figure dissolved into the mist rising from the frozen fountain. Henry stood alone, the echo of the ballroom music faint in the distance. For the first time, the man who had built an empire with certainty felt completely powerless. And in that quiet courtyard, under the fading light, he realized that the one thing he wanted most could not be signed into existence, it had to be earned. Now, let us return to our main character. The next morning, the sunlight over Willow Creek was pale and cold, washing the city in muted gold. Inside Street Augustine Hospital, whispers spread faster than any illness. By breakfast, everyone had heard about the gala, the photograph in the morning paper showing Dr. Wallace standing beside Nurse Evans, the caption reading, "The hospital's golden couple." Clara sat in the break room staring at the newspaper folded on the table, her untouched coffee growing cold. The other nurses exchanged glances but said nothing. The laughter that usually filled the room had vanished. She folded the paper neatly, placed it aside, and stood up without a word. Her decision was already made. By noon, she stood in front of the hospital administrator's office holding her resignation letter. The door was open, and Henry Wallace stood inside, already waiting. He looked tired, his tie loosened, the charm and certainty that once defined him nowhere to be found. "You should not be here," she said quietly, clutching the envelope. "If you came to stop me, it is too late." He stepped closer. "Clara, please, just hear me out." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I have heard enough, Dr. Wallace. You could have stopped them. You could have told the truth." His eyes softened with regret. "And humiliate you in front of everyone? I was trying to protect you." "By lying?" she asked, her tone sharp as glass. "No, Henry, you were protecting your reputation, not me." The silence that followed was heavy. He took a slow breath, his hands at his sides. "You are right," he said finally. "I have spent my entire life protecting what people think of me. I forgot what it means to actually care." She looked at him, her anger flickering against something deeper, sadness, maybe even love, but she pushed it down. "You cannot fix this," she whispered. Not with words. She handed him the letter and walked out. Days passed. Her resignation was accepted without delay. She packed her small room at the nurse's dormitory, folding her uniforms neatly into a single suitcase. Outside the window, the first signs of spring were showing, the snow melting, the air turning softer, but inside her chest, everything felt frozen. Before she left, she slipped one of her sketches under Henry's office door. It was of the hospital's courtyard, drawn from memory, the fountain, the light, and a single figure standing alone in the cold. At the bottom she had written 3 words. Asterisk. Take care of them. Asterisk. When Henry found it the next morning, his throat tightened. He placed the drawing on his desk beside the ring he had once planned to give back to her. The silence of his office felt louder than ever. For the first time in years, he skipped his morning rounds. He walked through the hospital slowly, seeing what she had seen, the small kindnesses, the quiet courage of nurses, the children in the ward she loved so much. Every hallway carried traces of her presence, and with each step he realized how much emptier the place had become without her. That night, unable to sleep, Henry drove through the rain to the little apartment address listed in her file. The building was dark, the windows shuttered. The landlady opened the door halfway, her hair wrapped in curlers. "You looking for Miss Evans?" "She left yesterday. Said she had family in Boston." He stood there in silence for a long moment before nodding and walking back into the rain. In the weeks that followed, the hospital ran smoothly. But for Henry, The rhythm of his life had broken. Meetings blurred, words lost their meaning, and every evening he found himself in the courtyard where she had last stood. The fountain had thawed now, the water trickling again, soft and steady. He looked at his reflection and whispered, "I am sorry." Spring bloomed fully over Willow Creek, but inside him, winter lingered. He had spent his life healing others, yet now he carried a wound no scalpel could reach. What began as a mistake had turned into the one truth he could not undo. He loved her. But love, he realized, meant nothing without honesty. And if he ever wanted to see her again, he would have to earn her trust the way she had once earned his respect through action, not words. As he turned away from the courtyard that night, a single light glowed in his office window. On his desk sat her drawing, the edges curling slightly from the warmth of the lamp. Beneath it lay a blank sheet of paper waiting to be signed, not a marriage line this time, but a proposal for a new wing at St. Augustine Hospital, one dedicated entirely to patient recovery and community care. At the top of the page he had already written the name, *, the Clara Evans Center for Compassionate Healing, *. He picked up his pen, paused, and smiled faintly. "For her," he murmured. Then he signed his name, not by mistake this time, but by choice. Now, let us return to our main character. Spring deepened into early summer, and St. Augustine Hospital pulsed with a quiet sense of renewal. Fresh flowers filled the front lobby, and new construction began on the east wing, the sound of hammers echoing faintly through the corridors. The sign outside the site read, "Future Home of the Clara Evans Center for Compassionate Healing." No one knew exactly who she was, but the name carried warmth, and soon people began to ask. Only Henry Wallace knew the truth, and every time he walked past that sign, his chest tightened with equal parts pride and regret. He had not seen Clara in nearly 2 months. She had left no forwarding address, only the note with her sketch and those 3 words that haunted him, *, take care of them, *, and he did. Every day, he walked through the wards she used to oversee, spoke with patients she once comforted, and made decisions guided by what she would have done. The hospital changed under his careless, rigid, more human. For the first time, Henry was not just managing medicine, he was practicing compassion. Then, one morning in late June, as the scent of lilacs drifted through the courtyard, a familiar voice startled him. "I did not think you would actually build it." He turned sharply. There she was, standing near the fountain in a light blue dress, a small suitcase by her side. The sunlight caught her hair, and for a moment, it was as if time itself held its breath. "Clara," he said softly, disbelief threading his voice. "You came back." She nodded faintly, her eyes moving past him toward the new wing under construction. "I heard about the center. Someone sent me a newspaper clipping." He walked closer, careful not to rush her. "It is yours, you know. Every decision, every brick, it is because of you." She smiled faintly, her tone teasing but gentle. "Then you finally learned how to follow orders." He laughed, a sound both nervous and relieved. "Perhaps I did." They stood in silence for a moment, the fountain murmuring softly between them. Finally, Henry spoke again. "I owe you an apology, Clara. For the gala, for everything. I thought protecting you meant controlling what others saw. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid to lose control, afraid to care again." His voice faltered slightly. "You showed me what real courage looks like." Clara looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. "I never wanted to be a symbol, Henry. I just wanted to matter." "You do," he said quietly. "You always did." She took a slow breath. "I cannot stay long. I have been offered a position in Boston, a teaching hospital." The words struck him like a quiet blow, but he forced a smile. "You deserve it. They are lucky to have you." "Maybe," she said softly, "but I miss this place." Her gaze shifted to the construction site again, to the workers laying stone under the morning sun. "You really named it after me?" "After the woman who changed everything," he answered. A soft breeze passed between them, carrying the smell of wet earth and blooming flowers. Then Henry reached into his coat pocket and took out a small box. "I kept this," he said, opening it to reveal the gold ring she had once left behind. "I never knew what to do with it, until now." Her eyes widened. "Henry." "No," he said quickly, "not that kind of ring. Not yet." He took out the ring and placed it in her palm. "This is not a proposal. It is a promise. That if you ever come back, whether in a month, a year, or a lifetime, this will still be waiting here, just like me." Clara's eyes shimmered, and for the first time, her composure broke. "You really do not give up, do you?" He smiled softly. "Not when it comes to you." She closed her hand around the ring and nodded. "Then, keep building, Henry. Build something worth coming back to." She turned to leave, her suitcase rolling softly across the courtyard stones. Henry watched her until she disappeared down the path lined with blooming lilacs. He looked back at the hospital, rising behind him, the place where it all began. For the first time, he did not feel like the owner of St. Augustine Hospital. He felt like its student. The mistake that once tied them in ink had become the lesson that shaped his soul. As the wind lifted the petals around him, he whispered, "Until you return." And somewhere, carried by the breeze, came her quiet reply, "I will." Now, let us return to our main character. 1 year later, summer returned to Willow Creek, and with it came the opening day of the Clara Evans Center for Compassionate Healing. The hospital grounds were alive with music and laughter, the courtyard blooming in full color. Nurses, doctors, and families filled the space, the air thick with the scent of roses and new beginnings. A golden plaque near the entrance gleamed under the morning light. Asterisk. In honor of Clara Evans, whose kindness healed more than medicine ever could. Asterisk. Henry stood before it in a crisp gray suit, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The applause faded as he stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but warm. "This place," he began, "was born not from wealth or ambition, but from one person's belief that compassion can save lives. Her name is Clara Evans, and though she may not be here today, her spirit lives in every corner of this hospital." He paused, the sunlight catching the faint silver at his temples. "She once told me that healing begins when people feel seen. I hope this center reminds us of that every single day." The crowd erupted into applause again, and Henry stepped back, his gaze lifting toward the horizon. He had built everything she asked him to, but something inside him still waited. Later that afternoon, as the celebration wound down, Henry wandered through the new wing alone. The walls were painted soft cream, the smell of fresh paint mingling with disinfectant. In the main hallway hung a series of framed sketches, donated anonymously, pencil drawings of hospital life. He stopped in front of one and felt his heart tighten. It was a sketch of the courtyard fountain, shaded with delicate precision, and in the corner, signed simply with her initials. *CE. He smiled, a deep breath catching in his chest. She had come back, even if just through her art, but fate was not finished with him yet. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the courtyard in gold. As he stepped out, he noticed a familiar figure standing near the fountain, her blue dress swaying in the breeze. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks, but when she turned, her smile confirmed what his heart already knew. "You built it," Clara said softly. "You came back?" he replied. She looked around at the children playing, the doctors greeting families, the nurses laughing in the sun. "It is more than a hospital now," she said. "It feels like hope." He nodded. "You made me see what hope could look like." They stood in silence, listening to the fountain's gentle rhythm, until Clara reached into her purse and pulled out the gold ring he had once given her. She placed it in his palm. "It never left me," she whispered. "But maybe it is time to put it where it belongs." Henry stared at her, unable to speak. "Are you certain?" he asked at last. She smiled softly. "For the first time in my life, yes." Slowly, he slipped the ring onto her finger, not as a correction of a mistake, but as the fulfillment of a promise. The crowd inside began to clap again, as if the building itself sensed the moment. The sound carried through the open doors, blending with the wind and the laughter of children. Clara looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "So this is how it was meant to be," he smiled. "No signatures, no accidents, just choice." The fountain behind them glistened in the sunlight, water droplets catching the light like tiny stars. As they stood together, the plaque nearby shimmered, the words engraved in gold reflecting softly in the pool's rippling surface. In that instant, Henry realized something profound, that sometimes destiny is not written in contracts or ink, but in the small, selfless acts that bring two souls back to where they belong. And when he looked at Clara again, her eyes shining with the same warmth that had once saved him, he whispered, "Thank you for signing the wrong line." She laughed, the sound like sunlight, and together they turned toward the hospital doors, ready to begin the life neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. Now,